Hi, I'm Peter Allen with the Mastodon Valley Farm School, and here to talk to you today about the fundamentals of regenerative land design. So I've been farming and homesteading here in southwest Wisconsin for the last 10 years. We started out with vacant land. I started cutting down trees and built a cabin and then built a timber-framed home. And we have a full homestead. We grow all of our own vegetables. We have a milk cow that produces our dairy. And then we have beef and pork and chicken that from the animals that we grow for our meat. And then we sell that meat as our main enterprise and how we finance ourselves here through selling meat. And so in the process of building out this farm and homestead, we've come up with our own process for how to go about thinking about regenerative land design. Before we started here, I was at the University of Wisconsin for 10 years studying ecosystem restoration and explicitly thinking about how to restore oak savanna ecosystems, which were the historic ecosystems here and also the most productive, diverse, vibrant ecosystems we can have. And in that process, realized that the way to restore these ecosystems is through agriculture, is through farming. Especially if we want to do it at scale, something that lots of people can do on their own lands, it needs to be profitable, and that could be at a big scale and a farm scale like we do, profitable, or it could just be at a small scale, at the homestead scale, profitable, meaning you get enough value out of the land in terms of food, fiber, fuel, that's worth doing the work necessary to do that restoration. And so we want to start here by talking about basically what do we mean by regenerative land design. And when I say that, what I mean is finding this kind of sweet spot where you discover where your individual skills, resources, and passions overlap with what's happening on the land, with the needs of your landscape and your community. If you're farming, that's going to be your market, to create self-supporting, if you're doing a farm, that's profitable, and ecologically functional farm and homestead enterprises. So that's the goal. That's what we're trying to get to. So we've developed a 4-step process in how to go about coming out with that design. So we start by defining our context, all the elements that make us who we are and define us. So we need to understand what all of those are. Then we're going to learn our ecology, which is really important when you're talking about working with the land. You need to understand how the land works and how the land wants to work. And then we choose our enterprise or enterprises. And then out of all of that comes spiraling out what I call an emergent design. So we're not just going to sit down abstractly with a pencil and a piece of paper and say, okay, I want a tree here and I want animals here, I want a house here. We're going to let all of that emerge out of this process. So we're going to go through these a little bit in more detail. That's our regenerative land design. So the first step is the most important and the one that's often the most overlooked. People get real excited to get out on the land and start doing things, and that's great. I was in that boat too 10 years ago. But to be successful, you really need to understand all the various elements of your personal and collective context. And so you need to think about all of your personal and social elements. You know, who are the decision makers that you're working with? What are the resource bases you have access to? What are constraints in what you can do, whether that's labor or money or biophysical, your quality of life statements. Also things like your health, your personal fitness level, your stamina, your emotional health, your mental health, your ability to focus. All of these kind of things are going to determine what's best activities to do on the land. And then there's the ecological elements of your context, which we're going to talk about a little bit more in depth, your water, soil, vegetation communities, and what's happened on your land in the past. Infrastructure, buildings that you want or need, buildings that you might already have, roads, access, how do you get around, fencing systems maybe that are already there or that need to be there, water systems, energy, the biophysical elements of the land itself, your latitude, your watershed, your climate, all of those things. And then economic context is also really important to understand. Whether you're trying to start a farm, that's part of your economic context, or a homestead, that's going to make different kinds of decisions desirable, knowing which one of those you're going after or both. And then thinking about, things, distance to supplies or distance to your market, what kind of enterprises and your enterprise budgets, what kind of marketing do you want to do? If you're an introvert, this is where the economic sort of collides with your personal. If you're an introvert, you may not want to do farmers markets. You may want to sell in other ways. If you're really extroverted, you may not want to worry about selling other ways. You may want to just be dealing with customers all the time. So all of those elements need to go into deciding what your enterprises are going to be and coming up with this plan. The step 2 here is learning your ecology. In our modern culture and education system, we don't learn a lot of ecology, and it's a real shame. And we all need to kind of get up to speed as quickly as possible when we're working with the land. Part of that you can learn from books and from courses like this, from attending courses and conferences. But the real teacher is nature itself, getting outside, making observations, just seeing, trying to look at the land in an unbiased way and try to understand what's happening. It's helpful for me to define terms. So what I like to think about on the land is what is a functional ecosystem. And I define that as an ecosystem that is diverse, resilient, so it bounces back from stresses, and productive. It's producing a lot of things. And these landscapes have trophic structure. So trophic structure is the energy being transformed up the food chain in complex food webs. So the sun comes down, the plants turn that into biomass via photosynthesis, and then herbivores eat the plants, and the carnivores eat the herbivores, and so on, until you have a fully developed ecosystem has a keystone species, a species that if you remove it, the whole system kind of falls apart. And in the past, that used to be the megafauna, the ground sloths, the giant herds of elk and bison that really transformed the ecologies here. And now that those animals are gone, if we want to have functioning ecosystems, we as human beings have to become that keystone species. We have to create the system that if we were to be removed, that system would fall apart. So that's our whole mission, is becoming keystone species. And so the way we do that is by coming up with a plan, a regenerative design, and then actually going out and doing, making that plan happen in the real world. Once we understand our ecology, we can pull out of that principles for land management. So we think about the farm or our homestead as an ecosystem, as an individuality. We're always working to enhance and maintain diversity. We need to be actively managing disturbances on the land, which may be counterintuitive, but disturbances create openings for regeneration. And so disturbances are critical, what I call regenerative disturbances. We need to keep the soil covered. We don't want bare soil. We want to try to integrate and stack as many functions and enterprises as possible. We're always trying to balance efficiency. We've got to have some efficiencies in order to be able to gain some kind of yield out of the land, food, fiber, fuel. But we also want to have resilience. We're not trying to start a factory here. So we have to balance efficiency and resilience. We want to think about our ecosystems as kin-centric. We want to think about ourselves as one of the species of which we are all related. So thinking about nature as a web of relations, and think about ourselves as a part of that web. Like, we're not separate from nature. We are a part of nature. We are nature working. Out of those principles, we can derive the practices that we do in regenerative agriculture, regenerative land work. So that's silvopasture, multi-species grazing, alley cropping. We could talk about mob grazing or high-density grazing, buffers and windbreaks, cover crops, no-till gardening and no-till cropping systems, forest farming, planting for pollinators, all that kind of stuff. So these are practices that come out of those principles, and these are the practices that we then choose from, basically, when we're coming up with our enterprises. We're choosing from these practices and figuring out how to turn that into a self-supporting enterprise. And there's lots of possibilities. There's an immense number, essentially infinite number of potential enterprises on any given piece of property, from growing vegetables and selling vegetables, or just growing vegetables for your family, raising sheep and shearing and making wool, knitting and selling knit products. Our neighbor started a wool mill, and we take our sheep wool to her, and she cards it and washes it and spins it, and then we get yarn back, which is really cool. We need to rebuild a regenerative economy out of these regenerative enterprises. We need to have regenerative and sustainable sources of fiber. You should be able to go to a store and get clothing that comes from the land, not from a different country grown by people who don't get paid. So we need to think about all of these enterprises and choose the ones that are best for us dependent on that context that we defined in step 1. And then once we've kind of come up with our enterprise, we can think about enterprise ecosystems, how I like to talk about it, where you have a core enterprise that either makes the money or sort of makes the homestead work, and then you can spin off side enterprises either if you have enough extra free time, you can do it yourself, or specifically by partnering with family, with friends, with neighbors to spin off mutually beneficial enterprises in kind of an ecosystem of enterprises. And I think that's where we all kind of need to be working towards with our farms and homesteads. And so once we've chosen our core enterprise and our enterprise ecosystem, then our design starts to emerge out of that. So we define our context, we define our ecology, we choose our enterprises, and then our design, how we go about changing the landscape to suit these and to foster these enterprises, that comes out of that. It's going to start to become obvious where fences should go, where buildings should be, where the landscape, where the roads should be on the landscape. And this is a process that requires a lot of thought and reflection from experience with the land. It's hard. You can't do this process basically before you have spent time on the land. You really need to spend time there, at least some, and have some kind of idea of how it all works and how you're going to fit in the land before you start making decisions. And then the thing to remember here, and this is perhaps the most important part of this whole presentation, is that it's an iterative process. You never want to create a design, a pretty picture, a pretty map on a piece of paper with where everything's going to be, and that's just going to be the way it's going to be forever. You go out and build it, and then everything just works great. Nature's always changing. We're talking about a complex ecosystem here. So ecosystems are complex systems. Human systems are complex systems. You put those two together, you have compounding complexity, which means that it's unpredictable and changing all the time, and you have to adapt. So this is an adaptive process where we do the work in our design. So we decide to do say a grass-fed beef operation. So we lay out a paddock design, and we have water infrastructure so we can move the cows around. We do that work. The next step, once we start doing the work, is unbiased observation. So we have to look at the results of our work and see what worked and what didn't. And so it's really important to be unbiased because it's really easy to have a filter on our observations of the world where we don't want to see things that maybe make us feel bad, like we made the wrong decision, like something we did wasn't good. So it's easy to filter that information out, and that's really harmful because then you don't get any helpful feedback and you can't grow and you can't get better. So we want to be unbiased in our observations, what's working on the land, what's not, and then being able to accept that feedback and then replan, feed that back into our design. So our design is just constantly changing based on our experience on the land. Every year we get better and better. We get more and more integrated in the land, and that's going to change our plan, our big plan. And so your plan is something you want to be revisiting regularly, probably annually, along with your other stakeholders as you grow and develop and get better and get a better idea of what your context is, what works for you, what works for your land, what works for your markets. You may have this beautiful plan for something. You produce all this stuff, you try to sell it, and nobody buys it. That's some feedback. You got to go back and, you didn't understand your market context quite well enough, and that's okay. That happens to all of us. And then, we take that new piece of information, we redo it, we have a little bit of a different design, and we try again and see what happens. So this is kind of a forever iterative process of design coming out of our experience and understanding and working and observation and feedback on the land. So That's the fundamentals of regenerative design. We teach a whole course on this where we go into much, much greater detail. I work with Lindsay Raybon, the owner and operator of Ecological Designs based out of the Twin Cities. And she does design work for farms and homesteads. And she's been doing it for 10 years. And she does excellent design work. And we come together at this Regenerative Design for the Farm and Homestead course and provide a lot of context where we go through basically all the things that we just talked about in much, much greater detail. So we have 6 modules that we go through where we define our context, we learn our ecology, we learn the principles and practices, we learn the economics, we go through case studies where we talk to lots of really amazing other regenerative farmers and homesteaders who've done it before, who've come up with successful operations, and we learn from them. And then we have a design practicum where we work together so that all the students can come up with their own design for their property. And I mentioned this earlier. I'll mention it again here. We've created the Regenerative Context Workbook. And what this is a workbook that allows you and gives you the space and asks you the questions to force you to really define your context in great detail. So we go through the personal dimension, the social dimension, ecological dimension, biophysical, infrastructure, all that. And you have place to define how it is now and how you would like it to be. And then once you've done that, you can come up with action steps, like how do I get from where it is now to where I've identified that I want it to be on some time horizon. And we give you the space to define those time horizons and come up with a plan for how to get from where you've defined it as being in today to where you want it to be over some time horizon. And so this is a really helpful document that you can revisit on this annual or regular basis, either personally or with your other stakeholders in your operation. And using this workbook creates a physical archived document that you can revisit and adapt and grow through the years and through the decades, and create and has a rooting effect of helping you make decisions that are best for what your vision and goals are. And sometimes it's easy to get caught up in the minutia of any potential decision and forget what your sort of big picture vision and goals are. And this helps you keep you to task on that. And so we provide this workbook free for all students in our course. And then at the end, we do a design practicum where each student creates their own design with other members of the class. They do it in groups. And then we provide each student with one-on-one consultations to help them work out any issues they might have or questions, or help tweak designs based on our experience designing landscapes to make the best design possible for your farm or homestead. So enrollment is open right now for that course. If you want to check it out, it's at mastodonvalleyfarmschool.com. I hope this mini course on regenerative land design has been helpful, and I wish you the best in your regenerative endeavors. All right, take care. Goodbye.